Imagine walking through Rome's filthiest streets at midnight, and seeing a familiar face in the glow of a torch. Not just any face, but the Empress herself, disguised as a common prostitute, taking coins from strangers. This wasn't rumor, this wasn't accident, this was power twisted into obsession. Tonight, we uncover how one woman's hunger for humiliation nearly brought an empire to its knees. Section 1. The Suburan never slept. Even at midnight its alleys seethed with life, like veins pulsing through the underbelly of Rome. Torches flickered against crumbling walls smeared with grime. The air was thick with the smells of roasted meat, spilled wine, and human sweat. Prostitutes in dyed wigs called out to passing soldiers, beggars clawed at cloaks, and drunken gladiators bellowed wagers in the shadows of gambling dens. Senator Gaius Marcellinus rarely came here alone, but curiosity had always been his most dangerous flaw. He told himself that a statesman must understand every corner of Rome, its virtues and its vices. "If we legislate for the people," he once said in the Senate, "we must first breathe the air they choke upon." His colleagues laughed, but Gaius returned to the Subura again and again, chasing some hidden truth in the chaos. Tonight, though, that truth revealed itself with a cruelty he never expected. He had been strolling past the Lupanar Maximus, the largest brothel in the district, when his eyes caught a figure leaning in the doorway. A woman, her shoulders bare beneath a coarse tunic, her lips smeared with too much rouge. At first glance she was like any of the painted women who prowled these streets. But something about the tilt of her head, the poise of her stance, made him look twice. Then she laughed. Gaius froze. That laugh, bright, crystalline, familiar as the chime of the Senate's silver bells. He had heard it echo in the marble halls of the Palatine. The laugh belonged to Empress Livia Drusilla, wife of Tiberius Germanicus, mother of the imperial heirs, the most exalted woman in Rome. His mouth went dry. "No, it cannot be," he muttered under his breath, retreating a step into shadow. But the torchlight betrayed the truth. Beneath the garish makeup, her features shone through. The sharp patrician nose, the pale complexion of her noble line, the calculating eyes that even in jest seemed to weigh and judge. Gaius's heart pounded as though he had been caught in treason. She was speaking to a baker, a stocky man who smelled of flour and garlic. He laughed nervously at her whispered promises. Then, with a clumsy grin, he pressed a coin into her palm. Livia, Rome's empress, slid her hand into his, and together they disappeared into the brothel's dark entrance. Gaius staggered against the wall, gripping the stone as if the city itself were collapsing. He could not decide what horrified him more, the scandal of what he had just seen, or the strange, shameful thrill that shot through him at witnessing it. A prostitute nearby, noticing his pale face, smirked. "First time seeing a lady brought low, Senator?" she teased, mistaking his shock for desire. He turned on her with a glare, but words failed him. He only shook his head and hurried down a side street, his sandals slapping against the cobblestones. Yet no matter how far he fled, he could not outrun the image of the Empress in rags, her imperial dignity abandoned in a house of shame. Why? What hunger drove her to such depths? Gaius did not yet know that this was not a moment of reckless indulgence, but a carefully cultivated double life. That Livia Drusilla had been slipping from the palace for months, perfecting her disguises, testing her endurance, feeding an appetite that could not be sated by the pomp of ceremonies or the admiration of nobles. The night he saw her was not an accident. It was the opening act of a secret performance that would ensnare senators, generals, and Rome itself in a web of lust and humiliation. And Gaius, though he tried to bury the memory, would one day be dragged into the center of her empire of shadows. Section 2. The next morning, Senator Gaius Marcellinus sat in the Curia Julia, the Senate House, listening to the droning voices of colleagues as they debated grain shipments from Egypt. His ears caught their words, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time he blinked, he saw her face again, the Empress in disguise, lips stained, eyes alight with forbidden pleasure. He gripped the ivory handle of his writing tablet so tightly that his knuckles whitened. It was a trick, he told himself. A woman painted to resemble her. An illusion of wine and shadows. Yet he knew the truth. He had looked into her eyes, and those were not the eyes of a stranger. When the session ended, Gaius lingered, pretending to examine records. He could not go home, not yet. The Subura had followed him into daylight, and his heart beat with dread. Senator! A voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see Aulus Crispianus, a fellow senator and long-time rival, studying him with amusement. You look as though you've seen Pluto himself rising from the underworld. Merely a poor night's rest, Gaius muttered, avoiding his gaze. Crispianus smirked. Perhaps you should avoid the taverns near the Subura. Too much Falernian, too many painted girls. They leave a man hollow by morning. The words struck like a dart. Gaius forced a chuckle, though his throat was tight. I don't waste my coin in such places. Of course not, Crispianus said, his tone dripping with disbelief. A man of virtue such as yourself. He clapped Gaius's shoulder before departing, leaving behind the faint stench of mocking laughter. Alone again, Gaius's mind twisted. Had Crispianus seen her too? Or was it mere coincidence? He could not risk asking. A wrong word could end his career, or his life. That evening, unable to bear the weight of silence, he confided in his most trusted freedman, Marcus. The two sat in the senator's atrium as oil lamps flickered, their light dancing on mosaic floors. Marcus, Gaius whispered, leaning forward. I saw her. Her master? Livia Drusilla. In the Subura. Painted like a whore, taking coin from a baker. His voice cracked, and he clutched his temples. Tell me I am mad. Tell me it was a dream. Marcus's expression tightened, but he said nothing at first. Then, after a long silence, he murmured, You are not the first to whisper such things. Gaius's breath caught. What do you mean? There are rumors, my lord. Among slaves who serve in the palace. They say the Empress has strange habits. That she slips away at night disguised. That she competes with women of the streets. Gods preserve us, Gaius whispered, his stomach sinking. Marcus leaned closer, lowering his voice further. If it is true, then beware. Do not speak of it beyond these walls. Not to your wife. Not to your friends. The stones themselves must not hear. An empress's shame can drown a city. But the senator could not unsee what he had seen, nor unhear what Marcus had confessed. And as he lay awake that night, staring at the carved beams above his bed, he realized with growing horror that Empress Livia's secret was not just her own. It was a storm gathering over Rome. Section 3. Behind the gilded walls of the Palatine Palace, Empress Livia Drusilla played the part expected of her. By day she was the image of dignity, seated beside her husband, Emperor Tiberius Germanicus, receiving embassies, attending sacrifices, bestowing alms to the poor with serene grace. To the people, she was the embodiment of Roman virtue, noble birth, flawless beauty, and dutiful wifehood. But when the feast ended and the torches burned low, another Livia emerged. It began with small acts of rebellion, almost innocent. She dismissed her chambermaids earlier than usual, claiming she longed for sleep. Then, alone, she dressed herself not in silks but in coarse wool tunics stolen from the laundry of palace slaves. She bound her golden hair beneath a dark wig, rubbed ash on her cheeks, and smeared rouge clumsily on her lips. The first time she dared it, her heart hammered so fiercely she feared it would rouse the guards. She crept through service corridors, guided by a single trusted handmaiden, Fausta, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Empress, if the wrong man sees you, Fausta hissed as they crouched by a side gate. Then he will be silenced, Livia replied coldly. Her eyes gleamed in the torchlight. Or he will find himself rewarded. I am not a prisoner, Fausta. Not even Rome herself can cage me. Fausta hesitated, but she had long ago learned that arguing with her mistress was like striking marble with a reed. With a reluctant nod, she opened the small gate, and the Empress slipped into the night. The streets swallowed her. At first she only walked. She breathed in the smells of smoke, wine, and sweat, tastes absent from the perfumed halls of the palace. She marveled at the laughter of drunken men, the raw music of street performers, the reckless abandon of life lived without consequence. But merely watching was not enough. Each night she returned, growing bolder. She studied the ways of Rome's prostitutes, their gestures, their whispers, their cunning negotiations. She lingered near brothels, memorizing the rhythm of their trade. Fausta once grabbed her arm in panic as a group of legionaries jeered, mistaking Livia for a common harlot. But Livia only smiled. "Do you hear them? They think me theirs. Imagine, Fausta, the men who bow to me by day would claw at me by night, never knowing." Her voice quivered with exhilaration, not fear. The handmaiden shivered. "You are tempting the gods, mistress." "The gods?" Livia's laugh was soft, dangerous. "No, Fausta. I am tempting Rome." And so the secret life of an empress was born. Not of desperation, but of deliberate hunger. A hunger for anonymity, for humiliation, for the intoxicating power of choice. For in the palace she was worshipped, but in the Subura she could be used. Each disguise, each coin pressed into her palm, each night spent in shadow fed something within her that no triumphal procession or senatorial praise could touch. What she did not yet know was that her secret appetite would grow too vast to be hidden, and that Rome itself would one day pay the price. Section 4. The night of Saturnalia was when Livia Drusilla finally abandoned all hesitation. The festival turned Rome into chaos. Masters served their slaves, dice games spilled into the streets, and the city's rigid order dissolved into laughter, revelry, and sin. The air reeked of roasted boar and spilled wine. Torches burned in wild patterns along alley walls. Livia wore her disguise well, a plain brown tunic, her hair bound in a ragged kerchief. To any passerby, she was just another woman seeking coin. Only Fausta at her side knew the truth. "Not tonight," Fausta begged, gripping her arm as they approached the door of a low brothel whose sign bore the crude painting of a satyr. "Please, mistress. It is too dangerous. The streets are filled with drunken men. If one recognizes you—" Livia shook her off. "If one recognizes me, Fausta, he will say nothing. For who would dare admit to betting an empress?" The brothel's doorman, a hulking brute with missing teeth, eyed her with suspicion. "We're full tonight," he grunted, blocking her path. Livia lifted her chin. "I am not here as a patron. I wish to work." His laughter boomed down the street. "You! Look at you, pale as marble, soft hands. You'll break before the night ends." From her pouch she drew a small purse, heavy with coin. She pressed it into his palm. "Then let me prove otherwise." Greed glimmered in his eyes. He shoved the door open. "Very well. One night. But if you collapse, don't blame me." Inside, the brothel stank of sweat and wine. Men staggered through narrow halls, shouting and pawing at women draped in thin garments. Livia inhaled deeply, almost reverently. This was no palace banquet. This was Rome stripped bare, raw and unvarnished. The madam, a leathery woman named Sabina, eyed her new recruit skeptically. "Another girl for the festival? Humph, fine. Keep your head down. Take the drunks who can't tell a goddess from a goat. If you last till dawn, I'll pay you." Livia smiled. "I do not want payment. Only opportunity." That night she surpassed every expectation. Where other women paced themselves, retreating after 2 or 3 clients, Livia pressed on relentlessly. Her body ached, but she refused to stop. She counted each man like a victory, each coin like a laurel crown. When dawn came, the other prostitutes slumped in exhaustion. Yet Livia remained standing, her hair tangled, her tunic torn, her eyes alight with something fierce and unholy. Sabina stared at her in disbelief. "Gods above, what are you?" Livia only laughed, wiping sweat from her brow. "Better than any woman you've ever known." Fausta pulled her mistress away before daylight exposed them, but Livia's triumph could not be contained. The thrill of degradation had become her drug, and the night had shown her something intoxicating, she could outlast them all. From that moment on, she was no longer content to slip into the Subura as a spectator. She wanted to conquer it. Section 5. Word of the strange new woman in Sabina's brothel spread quickly through the Subura. She was pale as ivory, refined in her movements, yet tireless beyond belief. Some whispered she was a goddess in disguise. Others muttered that she was cursed. The truth, that she was Rome's empress, remained unspoken, yet her anonymity only fueled the myth. For Livia Drusilla, rumor was not a danger but a weapon. She cultivated it. She returned again and again, sometimes in different brothels, sometimes in shadowed taverns where men bought her with dice instead of coin. Always she tested herself. Always she pressed further. But it was not enough. "Sabina," she said one night, as the madam counted coins at a sticky table, "I want more than drunk farmers and petty merchants. I want to prove myself against the best." Sabina squinted at her, suspicion tugging at her wrinkled features. "The best? You mean the courtesans? You're mad. They're trained since childhood. They know tricks you couldn't dream of. And they'd get you before they let some newcomer steal their patrons." Livia's lips curved into a cold smile. "Then let them try." Within weeks, whispers of a contest spread among the wealthy elite who frequented Rome's pleasure houses. An unnamed woman, strange, tireless, insatiable, was challenging the most celebrated courtesans to endurance competitions. The rules were simple. From sundown to sunrise, whoever could entertain the most clients would win a fortune in gold, provided by the noblemen eager to place wagers. The first match drew a hidden crowd, senators in hooded cloaks, equestrians with masks, even military commanders who risked recognition. They gathered in a shuttered villa in the Subura, its rooms filled with torchlight and anticipation. Her opponent was Callista, famed across the city for her beauty and her cunning. She eyed Livia with a sneer. "You'll last 3 men, perhaps 4. Then you'll crawl back to your farm, little girl." Livia only smiled. "Watch me." The night unfolded like a gladiatorial spectacle, but of flesh instead of steel. Callista paced herself carefully, entertaining 20 clients before collapsing in exhaustion. Her admirers applauded her skill, certain she had secured victory. But Livia pressed on. 21, 22, 23, her body cried out, but her will burned hotter. By dawn, she had reached 30, her rivals staring in stunned silence. Even when the last man staggered away, she rose, hair matted, lips bruised, eyes blazing with triumph. The room fell silent. Even the drunken nobles could not cheer. They had witnessed something beyond lust, beyond entertainment. It was obsession, terrifying, relentless, unnatural. Callista spat on the floor. "You're no woman. You're a beast." Livia only laughed, throwing her arms wide as if to embrace the horror she had wrought. "No, Callista. I am Rome." From that night forward, the contests multiplied. Aristocrats wagered fortunes. Courtesans lined up to test themselves against the mysterious pale woman who never lost. And slowly, quietly, the whispers grew. Who was she, this creature who could outlast all others? None dared speak the truth. None dared believe it. Section 6. The contest had satisfied her hunger for a time, but Livia Drusilla was no ordinary thrill-seeker. She was an empress, raised among the calculating whispers of patrician halls, where ambition was fed to children with their mother's milk. For her, even lust had to serve a purpose. One evening, as she shed her wig and tunic in the privacy of her hidden chamber, she spoke to Fausta, who sat trembling in the corner. "Do you know what I hear, Fausta?" Livia asked, her voice calm, almost tender. The handmaiden swallowed. "What, mistress?" "The secrets of Rome," Livia murmured. "Men speak in bed more freely than in the Senate. They boast. They confess. They beg for forgiveness. And I listen." She turned, her eyes alight with feverish purpose. "Don't you see? They come for pleasure, but they leave me their truths." Fausta shivered. "This is dangerous knowledge. If one man suspects, Then I use what I know to silence him, Livia interrupted. She placed a hand on her servant's cheek, almost kindly. Fear is the chain that binds Rome, Fausta. And I am its smith. From that night, her forays into the Suburra took on a new precision. She no longer accepted clients at random. Instead, she studied her targets at banquets and Senate gatherings. A senator who muttered dissent against her husband's decrees. A general whose loyalty wavered. A merchant rumored to cheat his taxes. Later, disguised and waiting in some perfumed chamber, she welcomed them not as empress but as an anonymous woman. And when they surrendered to her, they surrendered more than their bodies. They gave her their secrets. She remembered one particularly foolish senator, Publius Vero, who entered boasting of his conquests in Gaul. By dawn, he was weeping, confessing his fears of financial ruin. Days later, his vote in the Senate shifted mysteriously in favor of imperial policy. Fausta, now fully complicit, recorded these details in wax tablets hidden beneath floorboards. Each encounter became another thread in Livia's growing web. She was no longer simply indulging her appetite, she was building an empire within an empire. It was not long before she approached Sabina, the brothel keeper. I want more than contests, Livia said, her tone leaving no room for refusal. I want a house of my own. Not here in filth, but a villa worthy of Rome's elite. A place where the most powerful men may come, and leave their souls in my hands. Sabina laughed bitterly. A noblewoman playing madam? The gods mock us. But Livia's eyes burned with something Sabina had never seen before. Not madam. Queen. And thus began her greatest enterprise, a secret brothel for the aristocracy, hidden in plain sight, where every encounter was a trap and every pleasure a weapon. Rome thought its empress a paragon of virtue. But in the shadowed halls of her secret house, Livia Drusilla was becoming something far more dangerous. Section 7. The villa stood near the Campus Martius, elegant enough to pass as the private retreat of a wealthy noblewoman. Its marble facade gleamed in the sun, its gardens perfumed with roses, its atrium decorated with mosaics of mythological banquets. To the casual passerby, it was simply another estate where Rome's aristocracy might gather for poetry readings or dinner parties. But at night, the villa changed. Behind its polished doors, the air filled with incense and the low hum of music. Curtains of silk veiled doorways. Oil lamps painted shadows across frescoes of Bacchus and Venus. Slaves moved silently with trays of wine, guiding cloaked guests into chambers where anonymity promised freedom. This was Livia Drusilla's creation, a sanctuary of indulgence for Rome's elite, and a spider's web from which none could escape. Her genius lay not only in luring powerful men but in ensnaring women of their class as well. She summoned patrician wives and daughters with letters written in her imperial hand, veiled in polite menace, "Attend me, or watch your family crumble." Some came trembling, others defiant, but all came. Once within the villa, they were stripped of their dignity and compelled to perform. Aristocratic matrons who dined beside Livia at state banquets now found themselves forced into acts that, once revealed, would shatter their family names forever. Fausta oversaw the records. Hidden scribes etched every detail into wax and parchment, names, dates, confessions spilled in drunken passion. Every sigh became evidence. Every whispered treason became a leash. One evening, Senator Cassianus entered the villa, lured by the promise of discretion. He found himself paired not with a nameless courtesan but with Flavia, the daughter of his political ally. When dawn came, his face was gray with terror. "You cannot tell anyone," he gasped to Livia, falling to his knees. Livia lifted his chin with one finger, her smile serene. "Why would I, dear Cassianus? Rome thrives on harmony. And you will help preserve it. When next you speak in the Senate, remember tonight. Let your words be loyal. Let your vote be mine." He obeyed. They all obeyed. Within months, her villa was no mere brothel but a council of shadows, more powerful than the Curia itself. Senators feared her. Generals deferred to her. Merchants bent under her demands. Rome's governance was no longer decided by debate, but by the whispered bargains sealed in her perfumed chambers. And still, the people hailed her as the model empress, chaste, gracious, devoted to her husband. None dared connect the paragon on the Palatine with the mistress of the Crimson Villa. Yet for Livia, the thrill was no longer only in the acts themselves, but in the paradox. The higher she rose in public virtue, the deeper she sank in private corruption. And the contrast, like a blade pressed against her skin, exhilarated her. Power, she told Fausta one night as she gazed across her hidden empire, is sweetest when taken from those who believe they are untouchable. She had proven herself queen of Rome's hidden appetites. But what she had built could not remain in shadows forever. Section 8. By 43 C, the cracks in Rome's governance were visible to those who knew where to look. Foreign ambassadors sent puzzled reports home, military appointments granted to men with no experience, trade deals signed that benefited obscure merchants, policies shifted with no explanation. Senators muttered of strange pressures, of colleagues who once stood defiant now bowing meekly to imperial decrees. None dared speak openly, but all knew the cause. Somewhere, somehow, the Empress's invisible hand was guiding every decision. Yet Livia Drusilla herself grew restless. Secrets whispered in perfumed chambers no longer thrilled her as they once had. Blackmail, though powerful, lacked spectacle. She longed for something grander, something that would not merely control men in silence but display her dominance before their eyes. The opportunity came in the guise of religion. Rome was a city of festivals, its calendar thick with holy days to appease gods and ancestors. Livia seized upon this. If the people expect their empress to honor the gods, she said to Fausta, then I will give them ceremonies they will never forget. Thus began her most dangerous innovation, gatherings disguised as sacred rites, but orchestrated as theater of degradation. It started subtly. A banquet in honor of Venus, where senators and their wives were invited to recline on couches beneath garlands of roses. Music played, wine flowed. Livia herself presided in a gown of shimmering silk, her beauty radiant, her piety unquestioned. Then came the shift. Tonight, she announced with a smile, we honor the goddess not with prayers, but with embodiment. Venus is love made flesh. Let us not insult her with empty words. A murmur swept the hall. Some laughed nervously, others exchanged uneasy glances. But none dared refuse. To defy the Empress was to risk ruin. And so, slowly, the banquet descended into something else. Clothes loosened, boundaries blurred. Livia walked among them like a priestess, whispering instructions, pairing rivals together, urging wives into the arms of strangers. At first, the participants told themselves it was ritual, strange, perhaps, but harmless. Yet as the acts grew bolder, shame set in. By the time they realized they had been trapped, it was too late. Their dignity was gone, their secrets exposed to all present. The next morning, senators who once thundered with pride sat in the curia with eyes downcast, unable to meet one another's gaze. Their silence was Livia's victory. And she was not finished. Each festival grew more elaborate. Baksheek rites where youths were compelled to dance naked before their parents. Feasts of flora where senators were forced to serve as slaves to their wives. Every ritual ended the same way, with shame so deep it bound them tighter to her will. Execution silences a man once, Livia confided to Fausta as they watched the guests depart in trembling silence. But humiliation silences him forever. The Empress had discovered a weapon sharper than the sword, and she wielded it with exquisite cruelty. But each display carried risk. Each festival widened the circle of the complicit. Rome's elite were ensnared, but so many eyes and ears could not be kept silent forever. The whispers grew. The danger mounted. And still, Livia pressed on. Section 9. By the year 45 C, the villa's secret gatherings had become Rome's most dangerous rumor. Nobles still attended, compelled by fear, but they came with dread rather than desire. For each festival grew stranger, more humiliating, more impossible to refuse. And then Livia crossed a line that made even her most loyal allies tremble. She began summoning the youth. Letters arrived at patrician households, sealed with the Empress's mark. Fathers paled as they read them aloud. Your son must attend the rites of Liber. Your daughter must honor the goddess Flora. Their presence is required for Rome's harmony. None dared refuse. To resist was treason cloaked as piety. And so, trembling mothers dressed their sons in white tunics, their daughters in silk veils, and sent them to the villa. Inside, Livia greeted them like a priestess, her voice honeyed, her hands gentle. Do not be afraid, she would whisper. Tonight you serve the gods. Tonight you are chosen. At first, the rituals seemed harmless, dances, songs, libations poured to the altars. But then came the moment of unveiling. The youths, bewildered, were drawn into scenes of increasing intimacy, watched by their parents and Rome's highest officials. Fathers clenched their fists, mothers wept into their sleeves, but none dared object. To do so would mean confessing their own complicity. The shame was exquisite. Parents trapped by silence. Children bound by fear. And through it all, Livia watched, serene, her eyes glowing with triumph. One senator, Lucius Priscus, broke down afterward in the atrium, sinking to his knees before her. You destroy us, Empress. You destroy Rome itself. She bent close, her lips at his ear. No, Lucius. I bind Rome. You will never betray me now, for to betray me is to betray your own blood. Fausta, watching from the shadows, could barely breathe. Even she, hardened by years at her mistress's side, felt a sickness gnaw at her. Yet she dared not speak. She too was bound in the web. Foreign envoys began to notice. They returned from banquets shaking their heads, whispering of senators who seemed hollow, distracted, broken. Rome's aura of power dimmed. Its leaders looked less like conquerors and more like men living under a curse. But within the city, no one dared act. Livia had achieved the unthinkable. She had made herself untouchable. Not through armies or decrees, but through shared shame so deep it paralyzed an entire ruling class. And still, she was not satisfied. Fear is powerful, she told Fausta one night, reclining amid silken cushions. But worship is stronger. They have learned to obey me out of terror. Soon they will obey me out of belief. Her handmaiden stared, confused. Belief in what, mistress? Livia smiled faintly, eyes glimmering in the lamplight. In me. Section 10. By 46e, the villa had ceased to be a mere brothel or theater of humiliation. It had become a temple, and Livia Drusilla its high priestess. The shift was subtle at first. At her gatherings, she began to appear not in simple gowns but in robes of gold and crimson, her hair crowned with ivy and myrtle like the goddess Venus herself. Incense burned thicker, music grew stranger, and her speeches lengthened. You have worshipped the gods of old, she declared one night before a hall of senators, matrons, and trembling youths. But where are they now? Do they hear your prayers? Do they answer your cries? No. Only I am here. Only I give you ecstasy, terror, and truth. Worship what is before your eyes, not what lies in forgotten heavens. Some bowed their heads in submission, others stared in horror, but none dared oppose her. Soon, she demanded gestures of devotion. Senators kissed her feet. Matrons crowned her with garlands. Youths were compelled to dance naked around her as if around an altar. The villa rang not with prayers to Jupiter or Venus, but with chants of her name, Livia, Livia, Livia. Fausta, watching from behind a veil, trembled with fear. One evening, as the Empress removed her robes in the private chamber afterward, she whispered, Mistress, you risk everything? The Emperor. Livia turned, eyes blazing. The Emperor is weak. A scholar, a crippled dreamer. He rules because I permit it. But look, Fausta, look how they kneel. They do not kneel to him. She stretched out her arms, her body still glowing with sweat and incense. They kneel to me. And she was right. Senator after senator, general after general, bound themselves tighter to her cult of shame and desire. Some began to speak of her in hushed tones not as empress but as a divine force, half mockery, half fear, but always submission. One evening, after a particularly degrading rite in which rivals were forced into each other's arms before the entire assembly, a young noble named Sextus Aurelius could bear no more. He staggered before her, naked and humiliated, and cried out, "You are no woman! You are no goddess! You are a demon dragging Rome into the pit!" The hall froze. No one breathed. Livia descended from her dais with terrifying calm. She cupped his face in her hand, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "Then worship your demon well, Sextus. For demons do not forgive." 2 days later, his body was found in the Tiber, throat cut from ear to ear. No one dared question it. The message was clear. Livia was no longer merely Rome's empress. She was Rome's fear made flesh. And fear, she knew, was the closest thing to divinity mortals could ever touch. Final section. By 48 C, Livia Drusilla's shadow reign had reached its peak. Senators no longer whispered dissent. Generals accepted her commands as if they were imperial edicts. The villa's rights had bled into Rome itself, policies bent, marriages broken, families destroyed. And yet she wanted more. She began to issue instructions openly, bypassing her husband entirely. Orders for grain shipments, promotions of military officers, pardons for criminals, each stamped with her seal. At first, Tiberius Germanicus dismissed it as enthusiasm. But when he saw men bowing lower to his wife than to himself, unease grew. The breaking point came with Livia's greatest act of audacity, a wedding. In the spring of 48, while the emperor traveled to Ostia to inspect grain fleets, Livia declared herself divorced. Before a stunned assembly, she donned bridal white and married Gaius Silius, a handsome young senator ensnared by her beauty and too terrified to refuse. It was no secret tryst, it was a full ceremony, with priests, witnesses, and contracts signed in blood. The empress had not simply betrayed her husband, she had usurped him. Rome shuddered. Even her most compromised allies realized she had crossed into open rebellion. When word reached Tiberius, he refused to believe it. "My Livia would never," he muttered to his freedmen, but they pressed parchments into his hands, marriage contracts, witness statements, oaths sworn to the new union. His face hardened. "Then Rome has no empress," he said coldly. He returned with soldiers, storming the villa where Livia feasted with her new husband. The rites had dissolved into a frenzy of wine and flesh when the doors burst open. Torches flared, steel clattered, and the emperor himself entered, pale with fury. The hall froze. Nobles scrambled to cover themselves, youths wept, courtesans fled. Livia, still crowned in ivy, rose slowly, her face defiant. "Why do you glare so, husband?" she asked, her voice calm though her hands trembled. "Do you not see? Rome is already mine. They worship me, not you." Tiberius stared at her, pity and rage warring in his eyes. "You mistook fear for worship, Livia. And now you will learn the difference." Guards seized her. Silius tried to flee but was cut down before her eyes. Dragged into the gardens, Livia begged no mercy. She screamed, she cursed, she invoked the gods, but her voice faltered when she realized no one would meet her gaze. Her power had dissolved the instant her shame was revealed. The order was swift. A blade at her throat. A final gasp. The crimson veil of Livia Drusilla fell forever. The emperor decreed damnatio memoriae, her name erased from inscriptions, her statues toppled, her likeness smashed. To speak of her was treason. Rome tried to forget. But memories lingered in whispers. Senators still woke sweating from dreams of her villa. Matrons trembled recalling the night their daughters were summoned. And Gaius Marcellinus, the senator who first saw her in the Subura, carried her image like a brand burned into his soul. Livia had believed she could become a goddess through shame and desire. Instead, she became a warning that even the greatest empire can be ruled not by laws or legions, but by one woman's insatiable hunger. And though her name was struck from marble, her shadow never left Rome.